As the purview of jungle-dwelling tribes in South America or other remote places in the global South. Yet virtually every continent around the world has seen some form of cannibalism. This is not only cannibalism for survival, but almost every developed culture has featured socially acceptable cannibalism in one form or another. Although far from commonplace today, cannibalism has existed since literally the dawn of humankind. The motivations for cannibalism can be broken down into four basic types, and we will examine each of these individually. We will look at examples of cannibalism all throughout history. I'll explain cannibalism's place within the canon of humanity. But first we have to understand the mere idea. Because surprisingly, cannibalism is a lot more complex than just humans eating humans. The word cannibal comes from the Spanish word caribal. When he arrived in the Caribbean, Christopher Columbus reported a tribe of man-eaters who plagued the surrounding islands. He called these people the Caribs. The veracity of Columbus's tale has long been debated, and the most recent science indicates that it is not true. We'll talk about that more a bit later in this video. The Caribs were real people, but there really is no archaeological evidence that they engaged in cannibalism. In any case, the derivative word cannibal has stuck in the modern lexicon. To engage in cannibalism does not necessarily only include humans. In fact, cannibalism is astoundingly common in nature. Jaguars, polar bears, sharks, alligators, and other animals all have been reported eating members of their own species. Certain species of frogs, toads, and spiders all consume their young. But I suspect the viewer of this video is more motivated by an interest in human cannibalism. In the human species, cannibalism should really be taken as cannibalisms. The practice can be divided into a few different types. The first is endo-cannibalism. This refers to the practice of eating individuals in one's own society or community. Most often, endo-cannibalism exists in funerary rituals, eating the dead in the context of a funeral. Then there is exo-cannibalism. This is the opposite of endo-cannibalism. It is the consumption of human flesh from outside one's own community. This often comes in the form of consuming enemies, prisoners of war, or any invading peoples. Most anthropologists categorize cannibalism in one of these two ways, endo or exo. However, there is also the related auto-cannibalism. This is the act of eating one's own body. Auto-cannibalism is a loose term. Some scientists would file things like biting your fingernails or licking a paper cut under auto-cannibalism. Others point to more extreme acts, ritual practice, torture, body modification, or some types of self-harm. So why do people eat people? In 2016, archaeologist James Cole published the most comprehensive assessment of the nutritional content of the human body to date. Broadly, he found that humans offer similar sustenance as animals of our size. We are not particularly nutritious or non-nutritious. According to Cole, the human body provides about 125,000 calories altogether. This is certainly a lot at first glance. But as you consider the practical realities of cannibalizing someone, 125,000 calories becomes less impressive. First, people generally exist in communities, so in pre-modern times when cannibalism was decidedly more common, any single source of meat would be distributed among a dozen or likely more individuals. Secondly, 2,000 calories per day may provide an at-rest person suitable nutrition. In times without modern luxuries, when life was just physically more demanding, that requirement quickly would have risen to 3,000 or more calories per day. Additionally, it is just difficult to kill and or butcher a human. Murder would be usually met with dangerous resistance from the victim. Butchery is a laborious task with not insignificant skill requirements. Finally, Cole's estimate includes things like bones and teeth. It would just be difficult to actually consume these parts of a human body. So with all this in mind, hunting game has generally been the preferred method of nutrition for people across the world. It is easier, more efficient, and less destructive to the community. There are societies and cultures which we do not know and will never know. But broadly, it is safe to say cannibalism has generally not been used for physical nourishment as a significant part of any diets. Rather, the practice has existed to serve functions beyond regular sustenance. As I mentioned earlier, there are basically four such functions. The first is cannibalism as a solution. That is to say, there is some problem occurring within a person or a society, and the consumption of human flesh is the remedy. There is cannibalism as a culture. This more nebulous function sees cannibalism as part of a ritual that has some significance, often religious, within a group. This tends to overlap with the previous function, but not always. Next is cannibalism for survival, which is probably the most acceptable context of the practice. Think shipwrecks, famines, etc. Lastly, cannibalism as a crime. Why is it that some serial killers go beyond murder and decide to physically consume their victims? There's one more piece of the puzzle as well, one which is more cultural and abstract and maybe even more insightful. But first, let's look at these functions of cannibalism. One of the most significant justifications for cannibalism has been to fix some type of issue, to address some specific concern that it was believed consuming human flesh would resolve. The Aztecs are one of the more famous examples of human cannibalism. The Aztec belief system is complex indeed. It could certainly be discussed for hours. But in the interest of brevity, we can safely say that the Aztecs were desperate to keep the gods on their side. They believed that the universe had been destroyed 4 times already, and that their present era, called the fifth sun, began with the gods voluntarily sacrificing their own blood to keep the sun in motion and to maintain the universe. By regularly engaging in human sacrifice, the Aztecs would continue to provide the sun god with blood and prolong the fifth sun. There were a number of annual festivals for this purpose. The most famous involved sacrificing war captives at the top of pyramids and offering their hearts to the sun god. The limbs of these captives became the chief ingredient in a stew of peppers and tomatoes, but only a small handful of families would be allowed to consume this stew. Indeed, you will notice that very little of this really involves eating humans. Cannibalism was a very small part of the Aztec sacrifice. There's no evidence that the Aztecs enjoyed consuming human flesh, nor that they killed people for the sole purpose of cannibalism. We cannot categorically say Aztec people were particularly active or enthusiastic cannibals. European medical cannibalism is also a well-documented phenomenon. In historian Louis Noble's book, Medicinal Cannibalism in Early Modern English Literature and Culture, the author discusses 16th and 17th century medical remedies which centered around consuming human flesh. Egyptian mummies were crumbled into tonics, which were said to stop internal bleeding. Human skull was ground and consumed to cure headaches. One famed 17th century medical pioneer brewed a drink to stop excessive bleeding that was a mixture of human skull and chocolate. King Charles II of England famously drank a personal tincture, which was a mixture of alcohol and human skull. Drinking blood was also a remarkably popular remedy in the 16th century. German-Swiss physician Paracelsus believed that blood had health benefits. Processed blood-based compounds could be found for sale in high-priced apothecaries. The poor could not afford these luxuries, and so it was common practice to purchase cheap, warm blood immediately following public executions, basically right from the gallows. One 1679 recipe from a Franciscan apothecary describes how to turn blood into marmalade. European cannibalism is striking in part because it is so well documented. Historical records show that there was a long-standing